Sarah noticed Thomas Rivera's hands trembling as he called the meeting to order. Patricia immediately tried to take control. This irregular meeting has been called based on the complaints of a new resident who clearly doesn't understand how things work in Pinecrest, she began, shooting a venomous look at Sarah. Actually, Thomas interrupted, his voice surprisingly firm. I called this meeting to address governance concerns brought to my attention by several residents. Patricia's face flushed. You had no authority to. I've been board secretary for 4 years, Patricia, Thomas said, straightening his glasses. I know exactly what authority I have. He turned to Sarah. Mrs. Jenkins has compiled some information that requires our attention. I've reviewed it, and I believe we all should hear it. As Sarah distributed copies of her report to the board members, she noticed Elena Rodriguez giving her an encouraging nod from the second row. Mr. Chen sat nearby with several other neighbors who had been targets of Patricia's enforcement crusades. Sarah presented her findings methodically, using the projection screen to display key documents. She focused on facts, avoiding accusations, letting the evidence speak for itself. The room grew increasingly quiet as the pattern emerged. What exactly are you suggesting? Demanded Gerald Parker, Patricia's ally on the board. I'm not suggesting anything, Sarah replied. I'm presenting documented evidence of procedural violations, selective enforcement, and financial discrepancies that warrant investigation. An older woman in the back raised her hand. I was treasurer before Patricia's friend Diane took over. I questioned some of these same expenses and was told I was being difficult. A week later, I was cited for 12 violations and pressured to resign. Others began sharing similar stories. Board members who had been pushed out, neighbors who had questioned decisions only to find themselves targeted. Patricia stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. My husband will hear about this coordinated attack. Your husband has already heard about it, came a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Councilman James Winters standing there, his expression grave. And as a city council member, I'm deeply concerned about what I'm hearing tonight. Patricia's face went white. James, you don't understand. I understand enough to know that a formal audit is necessary, he replied, not meeting his wife's eyes, and that perhaps I've been turning a blind eye for too long. As the meeting continued, Sarah quietly took the seat. She had set the wheels of accountability in motion. Now it was up to the community to reclaim their neighborhood. Sarah Jenkins wiped the sweat from her brow as she carried another box labeled kitchen up the driveway of their new 2-story colonial home. The July heat was unrelenting, but the excitement of this new beginning gave her an energy that defied the temperature. After 15 years of dedicated service to the police force, climbing the ranks from patrol officer to detective to captain, Sarah had finally achieved what few women in law enforcement ever did. She had been appointed as police chief of Oakwood Heights. Need a hand with that one, chief? Mark called from the moving truck, a teasing grin on his face. Though he'd been using the title at home for the past week, it still brought a flush of pride to Sarah's cheeks. I've got it, she replied, adjusting her grip on the box, and save the chief business for when I'm actually in uniform. Mark jumped down from the truck, his t-shirt clinging to his broad shoulders. As a high school history teacher, he had the summer off, perfect timing for their move to Pinecrest Estates, an upscale neighborhood that had previously been just beyond their financial reach. The promotion had changed everything. I still can't believe this place is ours, Mark said, pausing to admire the manicured lawn and brick facade. Look at these houses. They're like something out of a magazine. Sarah followed his gaze down the street where each home seemed more pristine than the last. American flags hung from several porches, and children's bicycles lay abandoned on lush green lawns. It was picturesque, almost too perfect. The realtor mentioned something about an active HOA, Sarah said, setting down her box to stretch her back. Said they keep the neighborhood in top shape. Mark groaned. As long as they don't hassle us about your gardening experiments. Sarah laughed, thinking of her failed attempt at growing vegetables at their old house. I promise, no more zucchini invasions. They worked steadily through the afternoon, with Mark parking their second car, Sarah's personal sedan, on the street to make room for the moving truck in the driveway. Their new neighbors seemed friendly enough, with a few stopping by to introduce themselves and welcome them to Pinecrest. An elderly couple brought over a homemade pie, and a family with 2 young children promised to have them over for a barbecue once they were settled. By early evening, they had unloaded most of the essentials. Sarah was arranging books on a shelf in their new living room when the doorbell rang with an insistent, staccato rhythm. "I'll get it," Mark called, setting down a lamp. Sarah heard the door open, followed by Mark's warm greeting, and then an unfamiliar female voice that cut through the air like a blade, crisp, cold, and unmistakably disapproving. "Excuse me, are you responsible for the blue Honda parked on the street?" Sarah Jenkins had built her career on doing things by the book. Despite having every reason to use her position to simply shut Patricia down, she chose a more measured approach, one that would address the systemic issues at Pinecrest Estates rather than just her personal grievance. The morning after their confrontation, Sarah requested copies of all HOA documentation from the past 5 years. She was careful to make this request not as police chief, but as a homeowner exercising her legal rights. "You're seriously going through all this?" Mark asked, eyeing the stack of financial statements, meeting minutes, and bylaws amendments Sarah had spread across their dining room table. Sarah highlighted another suspicious entry. Patricia didn't become this way overnight. Systems enable people like her. Her methodical review revealed a disturbing pattern. 3 years ago, HOA fee increases had been implemented without the required 2/3 majority vote. Selective enforcement was evident in the violation records. The Patels had 17 citations for their vegetable garden, while Patricia's friend Diane had none for her unauthorized gazebo. Most concerning were the financial discrepancies. Small amounts, $200 here, $350 there, regularly disappeared under vague budget lines like administrative expenses and community improvement contingencies. "Classic embezzlement technique," Sarah murmured. "Small enough to fly under the radar, large enough to add up." She compiled her findings into a clear, fact-based report, careful to focus on HOA governance issues rather than personal attacks on Patricia. When finished, she contacted Thomas Rivera, the official HOA board secretary, requesting a special meeting. "Mrs. Jenkins, I'm not sure I can call a meeting without Patricia's approval," Thomas stammered over the phone. "Mr. Rivera, according to Article 3 of your bylaws, any board member can call an emergency meeting with 48 hours notice," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm not asking you to do anything improper. I'm asking you to fulfill your fiduciary duty to the homeowners of Pinecrest." The meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening in the community center. Word spread quickly, and by 7 p.m., the room was packed with residents. The 5 board members, including a visibly seething Patricia, sat at a table facing the crowd. Autumn painted Pinecrest Estates in vibrant shades of gold and crimson. The neighborhood transformed in more ways than one in the months following the fateful HOA meeting. The formal audit had confirmed what Sarah's investigation suggested. Patricia had embezzled nearly $27,000 over 3 years through phantom expenses and inflated vendor bills that kicked back to her personal accounts. Rather than press charges that would have meant a public trial, the board, now led by Thomas Rivera, had offered Patricia a choice: full restitution plus 200 hours of community service, or legal prosecution. She had chosen the former, though the humiliation of weekly garbage collection duty along Pinecrest's pristine streets seemed, to many residents, a justice of its own kind. On this particular Saturday in October, Sarah stood on her front lawn, supervising the final preparations for Pinecrest's first annual fall festival, her idea to bring the community together after years of division. The popcorn machines all set up in the Rodriguez's front yard, Mark reported, wrapping his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "And Mr. Chen's grandkids are running the face painting station." Sarah leaned into his embrace, surveying their transformed neighborhood. Children darted between houses with painted faces and cotton candy. Neighbors chatted in clusters on lawns where no trespassing signs had once stood. The basketball hoop at the Thompson house, who had moved back after learning of the changes, bustled with teenagers enjoying a pickup game. "Chief Jenkins, Elena called, approaching with a plate of empanadas. You need to try these before they're all gone. The breaking point came after an exhausting day that had tested every ounce of Sarah's professional composure. A serious car accident involving teenagers had required her presence at the hospital, followed by meetings with distraught parents and the press. By the time she pulled onto Maple Lane at 11:47 p.m., all Sarah wanted was a hot shower and her bed. The streetlights cast long shadows as she parked her sedan along the curb. The house was dark except for the porch light Mark always left on for her. Sarah gathered her briefcase and jacket, her shoulders heavy with the emotional weight of the day. She was halfway up the driveway when the harsh flash of a camera jolted her. Patricia Winters emerged from behind a large rhododendron bush, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone as she snapped another photo. This is violation number 14, Patricia announced, her voice cutting through the quiet night. The board has authorized immediate action. Sarah stared in disbelief. You were waiting in the bushes. At midnight? Enforcement doesn't keep bankers' hours, Mrs. Jenkins, Patricia replied, producing a large orange sticker from her purse. She marched to Sarah's car and slapped the garish violation notice onto the windshield. The bold black letters read, Violation, Vehicle, Sub GCT to Immediate TO Bullying. Something in Sarah snapped, not in anger, but in determination. She noticed curtains twitching in several houses. Neighbors were watching, as they always seemed to be in Pinecrest. Ms. Winters, Sarah said, her voice level but carrying in the night air, I've had a very long day serving our community. I'd appreciate it if you'd remove that sticker from my vehicle. Patricia's smile was thin and triumphant. I'm afraid I can't do that. I've already called Pete's Towing. They should be here within the hour. Sarah set her briefcase down carefully. May I see the HOA regulations regarding street parking, please? The complete, current version. Something flickered in Patricia's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps. But she recovered quickly. Of course. I always carry a copy. She produced a binder from her oversized purse and thrust it at Sarah. Sarah took it and, using her phone's flashlight, began carefully examining the document. The neighbor's curtains parted further. Section 4, Paragraph 3, Patricia said impatiently, clearly states. This isn't the official version, Sarah interrupted, her trained eye catching the discrepancies immediately. These amendments aren't initialed by the board secretary or dated properly, and this section, she pointed to the parking restrictions, has been altered. The paper is newer and the font is slightly different. Patricia snatched the binder back. How dare you suggest? I'm not suggesting anything, Sarah said calmly. I'm making an observation based on evidence. As a law enforcement professional, I noticed these details. Patricia's expression froze. Law enforcement. From across the street, Elena Rodriguez had emerged from her house, joined by an older man Sarah recognized as Mr. Chen from 2 doors down. Other neighbors were appearing on porches and driveways. Sarah reached into her jacket and pulled out her badge. Chief Sarah Jenkins, Oakwood Heights Police Department. I believe we need to have a conversation about harassment and the potential forgery of official documents. Patricia's face drained of color. You're the new police chief. I am, Sarah confirmed. And while I would never use my position for personal advantage, I am concerned about what appears to be a pattern of selective enforcement and possibly fraudulent HOA documentation. Mr. Chen stepped forward. She's right. My copy of the HOA rules doesn't have these restrictions. Mine either, called another voice from across the street. Patricia's eyes darted from neighbor to neighbor, her authority crumbling visibly. This is private HOA business, she stammered. You all signed agreements, which we'd like to review, Elena said firmly. All of us, together, with the actual board present. Patricia backed away, clutching her binder. I'll be speaking with my husband about this, she threatened weakly. Excellent idea, Sarah replied. The city council should definitely be aware of what's happening here. In fact, I'd be happy to attend the next council meeting to discuss how HOAs and city ordinances intersect. As Patricia retreated hastily to her house, neighbors began approaching Sarah, sharing their own stories of intimidation. For the first time since moving to Pinecrest, Sarah felt a genuine sense of community forming around her. Mark appeared in their doorway, taking in the impromptu neighborhood gathering. He caught Sarah's eye and gave her a proud smile and a thumbs up. Sarah knew this wasn't over. Patricia wouldn't surrender her power easily, but something fundamental had shifted in Pinecrest Estates tonight. Fear was being replaced by solidarity. Sarah moved to the entryway, curious about their visitor. Standing at the door was a woman in her mid-50s with immaculately styled blonde hair, wearing cream-colored capri pants and a pastel blouse. Her posture was rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line as she clutched a clipboard to her chest. "That would be my wife's car," Mark replied, his teacher voice taking over, patient but firm. The woman's gaze shifted to Sarah, her eyes performing a quick assessment that seemed to find Sarah wanting. "I'm Patricia Winters, head of the Pinecrest Homeowners Association." She didn't offer her hand to shake. Instead, she flipped through papers on her clipboard. "You do realize that overnight street parking is prohibited in Pinecrest. It's clearly outlined in Section 4, Paragraph 3 of the covenant you signed during closing." Sarah stepped forward. "We're just moving in today. The car's there temporarily while we unload." Patricia's eyebrows arched. "Nevertheless, rules are rules." She produced a slip of paper and handed it to Mark. "This is a formal warning. Please move the vehicle to your garage or driveway immediately. Further violations will result in fines or towing at your expense." Before either of them could respond, Patricia turned on her heel and marched down their walkway, her gait as stiff as her demeanor. Mark closed the door slowly and looked at the warning notice. "Well," he said with a forced chuckle, "I guess we've met the neighborhood welcoming committee." Sarah took the paper from him, reading the official-looking warning with its bold red lettering. "No welcome to the neighborhood. No acknowledgement that we're in the middle of moving in." "Maybe she's just having a bad day," Mark suggested, ever the optimist. Sarah folded the warning and tucked it into her pocket. 15 years in law enforcement had taught her to recognize power trips when she saw them. "Maybe," she replied, though she didn't believe it for a second. "I'll move the car." As she headed outside, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia Winters was going to be more than just an unpleasant neighbor. She was going to be a problem. Sarah accepted one gratefully. "These are amazing. And please, it's just Sarah today." "Not a chance," Elena replied with a grin. "You'll always be chief to us now." As they talked, Sarah noticed a familiar figure at the edge of the festivities. Patricia Winters in her orange community service vest, emptying trash cans with mechanical efficiency. Their eyes met briefly before Patricia looked away. "Do you think she's learned anything?" Elena asked, following Sarah's gaze. Before Sarah could answer, Councilman James Winters approached them, looking more relaxed than Sarah had ever seen him. "Chief Jenkins," he greeted her with a handshake. "I wanted to thank you personally. The City Council has used Pinecrest's HOA reforms as a template for new regulations across Oakwood Heights. You've made an impact well beyond this neighborhood." Sarah nodded modestly. "The community did the hard work." "Well, the community wants to thank you," James said, gesturing toward the center of the cul-de-sac, where Thomas Rivera was setting up a microphone. Sarah groaned. "Mark, you promised no speeches." Mark raised his hands innocently. "I had nothing to do with this one." Thomas tapped the microphone, gathering everyone's attention. "Before we continue our festivities, we have a small presentation to make." To Sarah's surprise, Mr. Chen stepped forward with a beautifully framed document. "This is our new HOA charter," Thomas explained, "which explicitly protects homeowners' rights while ensuring our community remains beautiful through cooperation rather than coercion. We'd like to present the first copy to the person who showed us what real leadership looks like." Applause erupted as Sarah reluctantly made her way to the microphone. She accepted the frame with genuine emotion, scanning the crowd of faces, neighbors who had become friends. "I'm honored," she said simply. "But this isn't about me. It's about all of you finding your voices." As she returned to Mark's side, she noticed Patricia watching from the periphery, still collecting trash, but with a thoughtful expression that hadn't been there before. Later, as twilight settled over Pinecrest and fairy lights twinkled in trees, Sarah overheard a new resident asking about the neighborhood's history. "Oh, you wouldn't believe it," Mrs. Thompson was saying. "There was this HOA tyrant who unknowingly picked a fight with the new police chief. It's become quite legendary." The story had grown in the telling. Some versions now had Patricia attempting to have Sarah arrested. Others claimed Sarah had conducted a midnight raid on HOA headquarters. Sarah never corrected these embellishments. Myths, she understood, sometimes served a purpose in communities. As the evening wound down, Sarah found herself alone for a moment with Patricia, who was collecting the last of the trash bags. "Quite a transformation," Sarah observed neutrally. Patricia hesitated, her customary defensiveness absent. "Yes," she finally said, "it is." They stood in silence for a moment before Patricia spoke again. "I was wrong about many things." It wasn't quite an apology, but Sarah recognized it as the beginning of something. Perhaps even redemption. "We will get second chances, Patricia," she replied. "That's what community is for." As they parted ways, Sarah looked back at her home, at the lights and the laughter, at Mark showing neighborhood kids how to roast the perfect marshmallow. She had become police chief to make a difference in her community. She just hadn't expected that community would begin on her own street. 3 weeks into their new life at Pinecrest Estates, Sarah and Mark's moving boxes were finally unpacked, but their troubles with Patricia Winters were just beginning. Sarah's swearing-in ceremony as Oakwood Heights' new police chief had been a quiet affair, attended by city officials and fellow officers. She had requested minimal publicity. Sarah believed in letting her work speak for itself. The local newspaper had run a small article, but her married name and the fact that she hadn't yet updated her vehicle registration to their new address meant many in Pinecrest remained unaware of her position. This anonymity became both a blessing and a curse as Patricia's fixation on their violations intensified. It started with Sarah's schedule. As the new chief, she worked grueling hours establishing relationships with her officers and community leaders. Often returning home after midnight, she would park on the curb to avoid blocking Mark's car in the driveway. He needed to leave by 6:30 a.m. for early morning prep at the high school. Each morning after Sarah parked on the street, a new warning notice would appear on their door. "That's the 5th one this week," Mark said one evening, tossing the latest notice onto their kitchen counter. "Does she sit up all night watching our house?" Sarah sipped her coffee, examining the paper with its increasingly threatening language. "Apparently, this one mentions a $150 fine. For parking on a public street? That can't be legal." Sarah rubbed her temples. "I checked the city ordinances when this started. There's nothing prohibiting street parking in this area. I think Patricia's overstepping." The next day brought an unexpected knock at their door. Mark opened it to find their next-door neighbor, Elena Rodriguez, standing there with a basket of muffins. "I saw you got another notice," Elena said, stepping inside when invited. "I wanted to warn you about Patricia. Well, she has a history." Over coffee and muffins, Elena explained how Patricia had systematically targeted several families in the neighborhood. Last year, the Thompsons put up a basketball hoop for their kids. Patricia claimed it violated property aesthetics and fined them daily until they removed it. They moved out a month later. "That's harassment," Sarah said, her professional instincts kicking in. "It gets worse," Elena continued. "The Patels tried growing vegetables in their backyard. Patricia claimed it attracted vermin and reduced property values. The Wilsons painted their front door navy blue instead of the approved forest green. Each time, Patricia escalated until the families either complied or left." "Why hasn't anyone stopped her?" Mark asked. Elena lowered her voice. "Her husband is on the city council. People are afraid to challenge her." That evening, Sarah arrived home to find Patricia herself standing beside her car, taking photographs with her phone. "Mrs. Jenkins," Patricia said without looking up, "this is your 8th violation this month. The board has authorized punitive measures." Sarah, still in her uniform from a community meeting, stepped closer. "Ms. Winters, I'd like to see documentation that the HOA has authority over public street parking." Patricia finally looked up, her expression freezing when she noticed Sarah's uniform. She recovered quickly. "The covenant you signed clearly states." "I've reviewed our closing documents," Sarah interrupted calmly. "The street parking restriction applies to guests and commercial vehicles, not homeowners. Additionally, City Ordinance 47B establishes that HOAs cannot restrict parking on public streets." Patricia's lips thinned. "Perhaps your understanding of the rules is incomplete. I'll have our attorney contact you." The next morning, Sarah and Mark found their mailbox stuffed with violation notices, not just for parking, but for unapproved landscaping, excessive porch lighting, and improper garbage bin placement. "She's declaring war," Mark said, leafing through the notices. Sarah stared down the street where Patricia stood, clipboard in hand, inspecting another neighbor's property. "No," she replied quietly. "She's making a serious error in judgment." That afternoon, Sarah began making calls to other homeowners in Pinecrest. If Patricia wanted to play hardball, she was about to learn she'd chosen the wrong opponent, not because Sarah was police chief, but because Sarah understood something Patricia didn't. True authority came from building community, not tearing it down.